Hi everyone and welcome. I'm Lucy, COO here at Stribe. If you haven't heard about us before, we believe that employee surveys can and should be run with less faff and more feedback. We've built a really amazing employee survey platform that is simple to use, and it's helping thousands of HR folk just like you ditch really clunky processes and, most importantly, spreadsheets too. So welcome to our webinar. We'll give it a minute or two. Again, I can still see a few people filtering in, but whilst they're doing that, please do say hi in the chat box. I believe I've turned it on so everyone should be able to message. I think pretty much every webinar up until now for the last 4 years, I've forgotten to turn that on for you. But yeah, please do say hi. We would love to hear your role, maybe where you're joining us from. And really, we're here for you today. So any questions you may have, do also make sure you put them in the Q&A box. You'll see that in the kind of control panel as well. People can upvote them and we'll have time at the end to go through them. So any questions you have as we go through the webinar or maybe at the start, do make sure you get them in early because like I say, we'll prioritize the ones during the webinar that are at the top. If we don't get to any today, and we didn't get to yours today, sorry, we will follow up with you afterwards and just make sure that you get that answer you need. So it is well worth making the most of that Q&A box. So today we're talking about something I think we have all felt before, that rush of activity around awareness days, like World Mental Health Day last week, followed by silence. We're going to be talking a little more today about why that happens, how it impacts trust, and what we can do differently in ways that maybe don't necessarily add a ton of extra workload into your days. Because while awareness days get that attention and that amazing conversation going, we find that HR teams really struggle to create change off of the back of those. And that's what we're here to fix today, hopefully. So I can see the chat's a little bit quiet, so I'm just going to force you all to do something in there. So just a quick question, I guess, just pop it in the chat. Does your organization usually mark awareness days in some way? Yes, no, sometimes. Did you do Mental Health Awareness Day this year? And how do you feel like that went? So feel free to pop some stuff in the chat and really do connect. We've actually had attendees from this webinar kind of make connections afterwards because of things they shared and challenges that they've had that others had already solved. So it's well worth making the most of that. Amazing. That's great to hear that you did Mental Health Day on internal comms, and hopefully we have some tips and tricks to help you kind of push that a little bit further and really into the culture of your organization. Okay, I'm seeing another internal comms come through. There's a lot around kind of internal comms. That seems to be quite a common thread. So thank you guys for sharing that. So I need to move my notes down a touch because they're being hidden by something on the screen. Yeah, a few ideas on more engaging events. That is a really lovely question. So if anyone has done anything recently that they're really proud of, this is a question in the chat around needing a few more ideas on engaging events. Any of the audience, if you've done an event recently you're really proud of it, you think went really well, do pop it in the chat. Because I'm sure there'll be some ideas that we can all take away from there. And it's always lovely to hear about the amazing things you're working on as well. So it's your time to shine if you've done anything amazing recently. So with this, awareness days, as we are talking about, are these amazing conversation starters. They remind us that well-being matters and that mental health matters, but they often become kind of the well-being moment of the year. And it's almost like after that kind of morning tea or that yoga class, all the internal comms that we send, maybe social media posts, everything feels like it goes a little quiet again. And the problem isn't necessarily the activity itself. Those are all amazing things to be doing, and we know how much staff get excited by them and how much staff value them. It's more around, and apologies if you just heard that ping, that's my laptop. Let me just close off that window for you. So the problem isn't necessarily The awareness days themselves, or the activity themselves, it's more around that pattern. Only 30% of workers believe that their organisation's spoken commitment to well-being aligns with the actions taken. So when employees see these amazing bursts of attention followed by near enough silence, it can feel a little hollow and performative. And when our actions don't necessarily match our messages, it undermines that trust and the progress that we're trying to build with all of these amazing events and all of these amazing internal comms. So at best, it can make things feel a little bit surface level, and at worst, it can make people feel more cynical about your intentions, especially if day-to-day culture doesn't match the message that they are seeing through these events. And we see this pattern in Stribe data all the time. Engagement and usage spikes around these moments, maybe World Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Week, and then drops when follow-up actions don't happen. And if we only talk about well-being kind of once or twice a year, we teach people that it only matters once or twice a year. So we really do need to find a way to kind of embed it throughout our culture. And when well-being becomes this tick boxing exercise, tick boxing? Goodness me, there's my stumble of the day. There's always one in a webinar. A box ticking exercise. Employees quietly disengage. They stop filling out surveys because they don't believe it leads anywhere. They stop speaking up because they assume it won't change anything. And over time, that all erodes trust. And it's often not in these kind of big dramatic ways, but in small everyday moments. And on top of all of that, the less feedback you're getting from employees, the less you can build well-being support that truly matches what they need. So when you're looking for ideas for more events, or you're looking for feedback on things that you've run, you're not getting that representation in the feedback that you're receiving, which then means future activities are even less engaging for employees. So it truly is a little bit of a spiral. So like when someone says my manager's too busy to check in, or we did a big campaign on mental health, but we can't even take a proper lunch break. These contradictions between what's said and what's felt really create that trust gap. And once that gap opens, it's really tricky to close it again. 3/4 of workers have quit or considered leaving their job because of poor wellbeing support. So I don't know if anyone is feeling brave enough to kind of share some of those barriers, and what they feel like might be a barrier in their organization right now. So, some of the things that might feel true for you is kind of lack of time or resources, not sure what employees want, leadership buy-in, measuring impact. Pop your thoughts into the chat, because I know that there will be people in here that can share some ideas or some thoughts around your challenges. And we're also really happy to pick those up at the end with you as well. So yeah, we'll revisit some of those later in the webinar too. And this is why those awareness days can't stand alone, because when the action stops, that trust stops. So if awareness days aren't enough on their own, what does that action really look like? And I think that's kind of what we're all here today to learn a little bit more about. The goal isn't to ditch awareness days, it's to make them more of a launch pad and not a one-off. So it's also not necessarily about doing more, it's just about thinking a little bit differently around them. So real action and looks like listening continuously to employees, not just once a year or when it's convenient for you, acting on what they say and visibly. Your people are really seeing and hearing about the change that you're creating, and communicating progress openly, even when you can't fix everything. And that does take a lot of bravery. So when you're starting to see all of those things come together, that's when you start to build a culture that feels really consistent and really embedded in those values that you're looking to build around maybe well-being or mental health, and it's less performative. It's also when you start earning back that trust, because people start to see that the organization isn't just talking about well-being, it's really truly living it. And awareness around all of this is just the start. But that culture that you're trying to build is the oxygen that keeps things like your well-being growing. Without oxygen, it all just fizzles out and dies. And the way that we keep creating that oxygen and momentum is through employee voice, listening to what people actually need, not what we think they need. And that's where kind of employee voice becomes a bridge between turning your awareness days into true action. So the strength of your employee voice is the single biggest predictor of trust in the workplace. When employees feel heard, they're more likely to engage, they're more likely to stay, and they're more likely to advocate for the business. And yet, this is where a lot of organizations fall short. They run surveys, they collect comments, maybe publish a few results, and then maybe nothing happens. But here's the truth: listening doesn't just build the trust, it's actually the responding that does. Even small feedback loops can make a huge difference. Something as simple as, we heard that the wellbeing webinars felt too long, and some people miss them because they're always on a Thursday afternoon. So we're trying shorter sessions, and we'll switch up the days and times each month to see if this works better for people. That's culture building in action, and it doesn't take a huge amount of change or resource to do it. At Stribe, we see this all the time. When teams start closing that loop, and it's with these tiny micro changes that we will get onto in a little bit, engagement climbs fast because employees realize that their feedback matters, and that creates that snowball for everyone. So I would love to hear a little bit about how your people can currently share feedback. Are you running surveys? Do you collect data from your one-to-ones? Do you have kind of Slack or Teams channels, suggestion boxes, or maybe nothing at all? It would be great to kind of pop that in the chat and see what everyone is getting up to. I think the thing to remember with all of this as well is that there's no one size fits all approach. What matters is that frequency and that follow-up. Okay, everyone's feeling a little bit reserved today, but that's okay. So now we've set the scene, we know the problem and the opportunity. So let's get into the really practical bit about how you can actually build that culture that outlasts hashtags. We're going to unpack 5 habits that we've seen make the biggest difference, starting with how we listen. So that first habit is all about listening, but not in the way you might expect. Most organizations treat listening as a reaction, something that feels like it's declining, most organizations treat listening as a reaction. Sometimes something, I'm getting muddled in this sentence, I don't know why. Most organizations treat listening as a reaction. You'll notice something feels like it's declining, or maybe something's going wrong. So we send out a survey to find out why. The healthiest cultures listen all the time, not just when things feel like they may need attention. And when you do that, you move from firefighting to forecasting. Think of it like reading your organization's weather. You can kind of start to spot the clouds before the storm itself. And this isn't about launching another huge survey, right? We are, I wouldn't say we're allergic to those, but we find that they can be a little overwhelming. So it's about those tiny frequent pulses, the ones that will just give you just enough to make the change that you need. 1 or 2 questions genuinely can be more than enough to help you with this. For example, you might be asking things like, what's one small thing that would make your work week better? Or how supported do you feel by your manager this week? When you ask these really simple human questions often, you create that rhythm, and that rhythm and routine build trust. And you'll notice with those questions, they're quite open, but they're also looking at improving life for employees and improving the support and that kind of psychological safety that they feel. What we see in Stribe, in the Stribe data backs this up. When organizations move from these annual surveys to quarterly or monthly pulses, response rates don't just stay steady. Oftentimes they actually increase. And this is often down to a few things. Shorter surveys, staff prefer to answer them. It's easier to close the feedback loop for you. You don't have a ton of data to go through, and it's easier to adapt your survey themes quickly. So all of this kind of adds up. So our tip for this is listen little, listen often, and most importantly, look for patterns, not just pain points, okay? The next habit I want you to think about is how to close that feedback loop. When we talk about listening, most organizations think the hardest part is getting employees to respond, but that's not actually the challenge. The real challenge is what happens after. The data comes in and then nothing visible happens. We know behind the scenes you guys are working really hard, looking at the data, trying to bring those themes to light and trying to get approvals for internal comms. We understand just how difficult it is. We work with people on this every single day. But that gap between collecting that insight and communicating that progress is where trust quietly disappears. So we need to think about how we can switch up our systems and switch up our processes to close that gap. And it's not about fixing everything straight away either when you're thinking about that communication and that action plan back to colleagues. Okay, we don't need to be going back with, here are all the problems that are identified in this latest survey and here's how we fixed everything. It's not about that. It's about showing you're working and letting employees see how their feedback is being used. So it might be as simple as saying, here's what we've heard, here's what we're thinking about doing about that, and here's what we're going to try next. And it might be another survey, because maybe your survey surface certain themes that you hadn't seen coming. There's a pattern there in the data that you're understanding. You're saying, here's what we're thinking that shows, but actually, we want to ask another survey to get your thoughts on it more specifically, and perhaps actually crowdsource from your colleagues some solutions for those issues that have surfaced. So that's it. That's it. There doesn't need to be polish or spin. There doesn't need to be grand plans or strategies. Just a really simple, honest, and transparent message about what you're hearing, what you're thinking that means, and maybe what you're going to try and change or do next. Your people don't need perfection, they just want to see that little bit of progress building from their feedback. At Stribe, we work really closely with our customers to make sure they're doing this in a way that isn't bogged down in processes and details, really by helping them build a quick and easy survey and that quick and easy feedback process. Some of our customers have seen their engagement rates double simply by sharing updates about what they're learning, not necessarily what they've solved, but what they've learned. Um, and it's something our survey reports are set up to do really easily for you. Everything is there. You can spot your themes really quickly, and there's absolutely no need for any spreadsheets as well. And I think I've kind of mentioned this already, but I really want to emphasize this, that if you're getting something through from your employee feedback that you can't act on, it's okay to talk about that too. Something as simple as, we heard this, we agree it's important, here's why it's a little tricky right now. That honesty builds far more trust than pretending everything's fine or not addressing it. Because even if you are not addressing it, your colleagues are still feeling it. And you don't need a communications plan either for this. Sorry to anyone that's from internal comms on here. It just is about consistency. And I think oftentimes we can get really bogged down in the detail of writing these beautiful, amazing, perfect comms plans. And we forget about that consistency, that trust, and that transparency. If people see you're trying, they'll keep talking and they'll keep trusting you. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. When we say leaders should be modeling well-being, most people will instantly go to big polished campaigns, town halls, definitely a hashtag or two, maybe a quote on LinkedIn, and most definitely a poster or two. Those moments that really say, our leaders believe in this, our leaders are behind this. And whilst that's definitely one piece of the puzzle, that isn't everything. The real modelling from these awareness days happens in those micro moments, and that's what I really want you to take away from this webinar. This is where our awareness days are often falling short too, because culture isn't, I'm really sorry, set by those comms campaigns. I know a lot of you have been running amazing ones, but it's shaped in how leaders and managers show up every day. And that's what we need to be thinking about. The best leaders don't broadcast well-being, they're really truly modeling it. They tune into the mood of their team. If people are quiet and stretched, they slow the pace or adjust resource. If someone shares something vulnerable, they respond with empathy and they are confident in their response too. They take breaks visibly. Maybe they share their small mistakes or their learnings each week. And if deadlines are piling up, they're the first to ask, what can we pause instead of can we just push through? That's what that kind of role modeling looks like when it comes to things like mental health and well-being. Leaders don't have to launch new well-being projects. They just have to show day to day that they take it really seriously. And just a reminder, it's not your job to convince leaders to care. It's to help set those expectations that they should, and then make it really easy for them to follow through on that. because that's what really shapes culture, those thousands of micro moments and micro interactions people have with their leaders every week that cement that feeling around mental health, well-being, or whatever else it is that you're trying to really embed into your culture. One of my favorite moments from a client was actually something I learned from them a little while ago. They mentioned that when a manager starts every Monday meeting, they actually share one thing that didn't go to plan the previous week. It's so small, but what it meant was that everyone suddenly feels safe to share their ups and downs too. It's such a tiny tweak, but it really helps build a lot of psychological safety, and really helps kind of employees bring their whole selves to work as well. And that's kind of how that vulnerability and trust that we've spoken about throughout this webinar so far really scales. It's not through speeches or posters, but through those patterns of behavior. So if there's one thing to take away from this slide, let it be this. You guys are there to plant the seeds, but leaders control the weather. So have a think about how you can really get those micro moments built into your days and your weeks. This next tip follows on really nicely from the last point about leadership, because once your leaders are setting the tone, what keeps that tone alive, like we're talking about, is those habits, those rituals, and those micro moments. They're the small, consistent things that make your culture really real. And they're the behaviors that happen without anyone needing to send a calendar invite or put another poster up. We often think culture lives in our value statements and those big events, the away days, the launches, the campaigns. But the truth is, and I think we all know this here, culture lives in what happens between those things, in those habits that repeat. But that is the thing that we struggle a lot of the times to harness from those larger, big events. So, for example, I would ask you to think about if your value is care, for example, what does one of your values look like on a random Tuesday afternoon? So if your value is care, it might be a team starting every meeting with a one-line check-in, not a well-being gimmick, just a genuine, how's your week going? It might be a Slack thread where people share their small wins or moments of appreciation. It might be a Friday switch off where everyone logs off early if the week's gone well. Or maybe it's a quiet expectation that managers eat lunch away from their desks so their team feel like they can too. These things don't take budget or policy, they just take that repetition. And repetition is what makes well-being visible and memorable and believable way beyond your awareness days. You can have all the policies in the world, but it's the everyday rituals that tell people what's really okay here today for you. Because those policies will write intention and they give managers and leaders the ideas and the space to operate, but the rituals show that permission for employees to continue them. So I'd love for you just to take one thought away from this slide, and that's kind of what's one ritual that already happens in your team, even if you've never called it that. Because I know a lot of people will have sat there just now and thought, oh gosh, these don't happen for us. I don't know. But yeah, really kind of take that away and have a think about that, because I can guarantee you'll see more than you realize. And when you see them happening, you'll be able to harness them and amplify them more. When we start working with organizations through Stribe, we often start by looking for these patterns in the data, these positive micro moments that are already happening. And it's something our software does really well, actually. In the comments, we can pull out key themes and we can pull out kind of repeated words and patterns. So, have a look through things like your surveys or your employee voice kind of platforms. They should help you identify those micro moments that are already happening, and you'll be able to then have that foundation to work from. Sometimes it's something really small, like maybe one department consistently mentioning great team support in their feedback. That tells you kind of where to look for behaviours and what's worth amplifying. Fiona's just fed back that every Monday morning we share what we did at the weekend. And I absolutely love that, because work is, and your team are so much more than the jobs they do. And creating that connection and that empathy with each other is so important. So I really love that one. It's a really, really lovely one to be doing. So good job, Fiona. So often The culture you want to build is already there. Kind of, we're seeing that come through in the comments as well, I think. It's maybe just hidden in the busyness of the everyday. So rather than thinking in terms of programs, start thinking in terms of patterns. See if you can find what's working and maybe make it a little bit more visible. People will start to copy it, and that's how that culture spreads. Quietly through your habits, not necessarily those big headline events and those big headline moments. So I think I gave you a little challenge on earlier, but yeah, I want you just to finish with this slide is a little challenge from me just to really truly find that one ritual already happening quietly in your organization. Perhaps Fiona, for example, maybe it's just your team sharing what you did at the weekend, and you're going to encourage the rest of the organization to do that. So find that one ritual already quietly happening in your organization and see if there are ways to amplify that and spread that a little bit wider. Finally, the final kind of tip is when it comes to measuring mental health and well-being, a lot of organizations start with happiness, and that's understandable. We want everyone to be happy at work. We want everyone to love what they do. But happiness isn't necessarily always the full picture. People can be happy on a good day and still not feel comfortable or safe, to be honest, when things aren't going well. So, the real measure to think about is that psychological safety element that we mentioned earlier in the webinar. That sense that people can speak up, make mistakes, or ask for help without fear of judgment or repercussion. Because when people feel safe, that's when the things like honesty, creativity, and yes, genuine happiness follow. The challenge is safety doesn't show up neatly in data. You absolutely can ask, do you feel psychologically safe? But doing that once a year and calling it done is not it. Psychological safety is truly built from those hundreds of small moments where people test the culture of the organization and you see how it responds. That's why it's so powerful to look beyond those engagement scores and track the quality of conversations happening across your organization. It's questions like, are people raising concerns early? Are managers checking in without HR having to prompt them? Are wellbeing resources actually truly being used and they're not just being advertised and left to grow to gather dust? Those are all signs that trust is working beneath the surface. At Strive, this is something we really do help teams track, not through these complex frameworks or anything like that, but just through these continuous feedback loops. With Strive, you can start to see when people feel safer to be honest and how that shifts things like morale, confidence, and connection over time. And that's really the goal. It's not to have the happiest team every day, as much as we would all love that. It's to have a culture where people feel safe enough to tell you when they're not. And that's what really truly creates that lasting well-being. Not just a single awareness day, but the environment where it's okay to be a human all year round. So, before we wrap up, I want to bring us back to the heart of what we've talked about today and how you can take this forward in a really practical way. If you remember three things today, let them be this. Firstly, awareness days are a start, not a strategy. They can spark great conversations, but culture doesn't grow from those one off moments. It grows from what we can do after. So instead of asking, what can we do for World Mental Health Day next year, start asking, what's one small thing we can do every week that supports mental health in a real way? And it doesn't need to be those big, big gestures. And I hope I've given you a few examples for that through the webinar that will help you see that and give you some ideas to start that in your own organisation. Secondly, excuse me, employee voice fuels trust and action. Your people will not, your people will always tell you what's working and what's not if you give them the space and safety to do so. The organizations that build real trust aren't the ones with the biggest budgets. They're the ones that keep listening, keep closing the loop, and keep showing they care through action. This is also a really good point just to kind of emphasize that it's really worth taking a look at the kind of systems and software you're using to support employee voice, because oftentimes this can be made to feel a really huge, burdensome job. And it's often if your systems and software aren't set up to be really simple and easy to use, it's just adding an extra task to your list that just doesn't need to be there. And the third thing is those small, consistent actions make the biggest difference. We've seen and talked about today that culture isn't built in those grand gestures, it's built in the everyday, in those quick check ins, visible breaks, honest updates, and small rituals that quietly reinforce what matters. If you can focus on these three things, starting small, listening regularly, and closing that loop, you'll be building a culture that really truly does outlast any hashtags. A culture where well-being isn't a one-day initiative, it's part of how work gets done all year round. So, if today's talk has got you thinking and you're looking for ways to declutter, simplify, or invest in your employee voice surveys, that's exactly what I would love to help you with. We at Stribe and our software gives you a really simple way to listen, act, and close the loop so you can keep that momentum going all year round. You can book a short demo with us via our website, stribehq.com/book dash call. It's a really great way to see how other teams are doing this without adding to their workloads. And yeah, we'll be happy to show you around the software and talk about how hopefully it will support your strategies going forwards. So I'd love to hear if any of this has really hit home for you or what's been hardest to implement. I haven't seen any questions come through in the Q&A box, but you've got some time now to pop them in the Q&A box or the webinar chat, or if you've got any reflections you wanted to share, that would be amazing too. It seems like I maybe have answered everything as we've gone through the webinar, but I will just give you guys a minute while I have a sip of my coffee, very much needed, just to type anything out if there is anything that you would like to pick my brains on while we're live. No, everyone's happy and quiet. Okay, awesome. So thank you so much, everyone. I have popped our email address on the slide. So if you do have questions that you'd like to follow up with us, hello@stribehq.com. The team will make sure that email comes through to me so I can follow up with you. So if you do have any questions or, Kaltner, with your ideas on more engaging events, I'm happy to follow up and share some things that I've seen our customers doing too. So please do get in touch. You can also look me up on LinkedIn. Just search Lucy Harvey Stribe and I should hopefully pop up there too. And I'll probably likely pop you all a little invite after this anyway. But thank you so much for joining. It was so lovely to have you here today and to hear about what you've been doing as well. After this, we really do love it if you could share kind of maybe your favorite insight from this talk on LinkedIn, maybe tag myself or Stribe. We really do love hearing what you've learned from these talks. We'll be sharing a recording of the talk afterwards, so feel free also to share with colleagues who you think will find this useful. Like I said, if there's anything else you need from me or the team, or have a quick question or some advice on surveys, or really truly implementing this in your workplace, please do get in touch. We absolutely love supporting organisations like yourselves, and we genuinely do really love to have these conversations and share as much as we can to help you create happier and more psychologically safe workplaces. So thank you so much, everyone. I know we're finishing a little bit early today. I won't tell anyone if you don't. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you on another webinar very soon. Thank you so much, everyone. We will share the recording with you afterwards. And I hope you all have a lovely day.